If you've been watching our YouTube channel in the last couple of months, we've got a playlist of a number of interviews with U.S. experts, legal and political experts, talking about Donald Trump's strategy of ungoverning. Basically, he's not coming in to govern the federal government. He's in to break it, to break the machinery of government. And I have applied that to Danielle Smith in Alberta. And I was chatting with political scientist Duane Bratt today about it. He doesn't quite agree. And so I thought, well, that's a good conversation for us to have. It'd be very interesting. Duane, welcome to the interview.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that we disagreed, Markham. So there you go. I will say right off the top, Donald Trump does not have a governing strategy. He ran for office, I think, for three reasons. One is to stay out of jail. Two is retribution on those that he has seen as wronging him. And third is to get wealthy, is to use the office to get wealthy. So now that he's in office, what's he been doing? Getting wealthy, getting his kids wealthy. The amount of just outright corruption staring you in the face, it puts Hunter Biden to shame. Or Billy Carter to shame. He has been pardoning all of his supporters, and he has sicked the Department of Justice on his enemies. I will say the other thing he likes is the ceremony. Most presidents don't really care for the ceremonial stuff. They are in there for the doing of the stuff. But he likes the saluting, and he likes living in the White House, and he likes having the bully pulpit. That's why I think he's spending so much time on the ballroom than on affordability. Having said all that, there is a ungovernable strategy being pursued by his administration, not by Donald Trump, because he can't figure this stuff out. Mm-hmm. But there are the Project 2025 people have been spending time doing this. Stephen Miller has been spending time doing this. So there is an element of just out and out racism of what is driving this administration. But the other is to just break government.
Duane, have you read Project 2025? Now, I won't say that I've read the whole thing, but I've read the foreword and the afterword. And the rest of the document is a department by department playbook on how to dismantle government.
Yeah, I've read some of the chapters beyond, the intro and the conclusion. I did go into some, but not the entire thing. But this is a playbook, and they are implementing it step by step by step. They, meaning the people around Trump, not Trump himself.
Yes, I think.
And so when he said, during the campaign, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. I don't know what it is. I repudiate it. I believe him. I don't think he's read the document.
Well, it would require him to read. So I think right off the bat, we can say that, that's a reasonable inference. But look, I mean, okay, so when we say Trump, we mean the Trump administration.
You're seeing that play itself out. And yesterday was a clear case of the two of them, of those two themes colliding. And that is the signing ceremony of some sort of peace agreement between the Congo and Rwanda. But it was at what used to be called the U.S. Institute of Peace, which was entirely dismantled under Doge. It has now been reopened, but now they're calling it the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace. So it combines the ceremony with essentially the breaking of government. And the focus in the Americans is about affordability and healthcare and vaccines. The dismantlement of U.S. aid programs has just had a devastating impact around the world. People are dying. Lots and lots and lots of people are dying as a deliberate attempt at what the Americans have done.
Okay, let's make one distinction.
So that's the U.S.
Yeah, that's it. Well, hang on a second. Remember, Donald Trump 1.0 was not this radical. He wanted to test the guardrails, admittedly, but it's Donald Trump 2.0 where his team came in prepared, and it was an entirely different game.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is I don't think he thought he was going to win in 2016. And I think he was as surprised as anyone when he did. So there was no playbook on how to govern. And then as a result of that, he's scrambling to find a team. So he put some traditional Republicans into some senior posts. And they're all gone. You don't see a Steve Mnuchin. You don't see even a Rex Tillerson, who came out of government or came out of the private sector, but a fairly serious guy. They're all gone. And he has none of that. So what you have is a combination of absolute significance and a combination of people who have been plotting this for a long time, and they finally have the vehicle to do so.
And
that's why 2.0, term 2, is so much different than term 1. I teach international trade, and all you have to do is look at the NAFTA renegotiations from the first term. It looks, in retrospect, it probably didn't seem so at the time, but in retrospect, a normal trade negotiation. They have a very complicated trade agreement. It took multiple years. There were serious people involved. That's not what we're seeing now.
Okay. Now, first of all, I would not argue that Danielle Smith, as Premier of Alberta, is Smith 2.0. She's not quite Smith 1.0, but maybe 1.5. Let's say. But and furthermore, this is the Canadian context. She is a provincial premier, subnational leader, not a national leader like Trump is. I mean, it's not perfectly analogous, but there are enough parallels between what Trump is doing and what Smith is doing that you can see there's an echo. Would you not agree?
A little bit. I think obviously the guardrails, the Democratic guardrails, are still much stronger in Canada. They're still stronger in Alberta than they are in the United States. I would argue that much of what Smith is doing, if you look back to her Wild Rose days, it looks very similar to what she wanted to do. There are some notable exceptions, and people love highlighting some of the criticisms that she was making. But the criticism she was making was as an opposition leader against the government. Now that she's in government, she's perfectly happy using those tools. So one of my favorite videos is Smith railing against the progressive conservatives at the time for passing laws in weeks, and in days and weeks. This is in the aftermath of pushing through the end of the teacher strike and the notwithstanding clause in the span of a couple hours, right? And so I think the difference there is not necessarily is Smith different from the Wild Rose days. It's the difference between being in opposition and being in government. And we see numerous examples of that everywhere. It's not unique to Alberta, nor is it unique to Danielle Smith.
I interviewed you shortly after she became premier. Maybe it was 2022, 23. And we were talking about where should we peg her? And you called her a radical libertarian. I don't know if you remember that, but you called her a radical libertarian. And the thing that stuck with me is the radical part. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of how she conducts government in Alberta is radically different from what came before. Or you'd have to go back a long ways to find a government that is that radical, maybe back to Aberhart and social. So, and when you start looking at individual files, like what she's doing with healthcare, there's a lot of breakage in there, man.
So I've started to use the phrase authoritarian libertarianism. In other words, which is just a bit of a spin off the radical libertarianism, where because she's in office, she is using the powers of the state to impose things, the likes of which we have not seen since the 1930s. And I'll just start off with the easy ones before we get into the more new ones, and that's the issues with municipalities. To be clear, no Alberta premier is happy with big city mayors because they have very different agendas. There was a short détente between Rachel Notley after being elected, Nenshi in Calgary, Iveson in Edmonton. That détente didn't last very long. So there's always been conflict. But only Smith has taken the actions, basically stripping away lots of powers from municipalities. So the imposing of a party system, changing the fundraising of elections on them, limiting them from talking to the federal government unless their hand was being held by the provincial government. So there's a whole host of things that other premiers may have been unhappy with. They never exhorted to this, or direct threats, intervening over bike lanes and LRT routes. So that would be an illustration of using the power of the provincial government to sort of impose their will. There had been rumblings about creating a strong mayor system in Calgary and in Edmonton. In other words, that they would have more than just one vote on council. They would have additional powers. But unfortunately for both Andrew Knack and Jeremy Farkas, they're the wrong people. And so they're not going to get this big city mayor. I think if Sonia Sharp and Tim Cartmel were the mayors, they would be giving those powers. So that's a clear illustration of a provincial government using the tools of the state to impose a will. Going beyond municipalities, we've seen the deliberate breakup of Alberta Health Services. We have seen the firing of the board over and over again, the firing of CEOs over and over again, the firing of the AIMCO board and its senior management, trying to impose their will on post-secondary institutions, going after provincial sport organizations over the safety in sport. So there is some parallels to what we're seeing with Trump, except I would call it, they're not trying to ungovernable things. She wants to bring it essentially, it's even not the legislature. It's putting it, even not in cabinet, it's putting it in the premier's office, which is similar to what we're seeing in the US with putting everything in the hands of the president and weakening Congress and other institutions.
That is a key characteristic of ungoverning, is to accumulate power in the executive office, which the equivalent, of course, as you point out, is the premier's office. There's another characteristic here that I want to talk about, and that is governing through chaos and surprise. And
yeah.
You can't argue, I don't think, that Smith there's a fair amount of chaos going on. I mean, it's like, it's not a scandal per day. Sometimes there's multiple scandals per day, and there's always...
And the rules keep changing. So yesterday, they introduced a new omnibus bill looking at elections and basically changing the rules around citizens' initiative referendums while they're ongoing. I was surprised there was nothing about recall. Right now, by my count, there are 19 recall petitions, including against Danielle Smith. There had been rumblings that they were going to change the rules on recall. That was not in yesterday's announcement. Maybe that's next week. We don't know. Stay tuned. So there's been, just last week alone, you saw the changes to elections. Okay. And you also saw the invoking of the Sovereignty Act dealing with guns. It's only been a week ago that the MOU was signed with Mark Carney. Those are three major developments in the span of a week. That's a lot.
Right. And as I was mentioning to you off camera already, we ran a story, and folks, you can go on our YouTube channel where you'll see this video. And right next to it will be the one where economist Dave Sawyer describes for me how 1 week after signing the MOU with Mark Carney, the Smith government has gutted the industrial emitters carbon tax, which was a key part of what Alberta had to give to get a commitment to a pipeline. So, so she's, I argued that she was negotiating in bad faith. But here's another thing I want to talk about, and that is politicizing bureaucratic leadership. You brought up the Alberta Health Services, but there's another one that I know a little better, and that is the Department of Energy. Because a lot of, obviously know people who work there or have worked there. And what they tell me is the power has been taken away from the bureaucrats. It either goes up through the minister's office, Brian Jean, or it goes up right straight through to the premier's office. And that just seems that's classic ungoverning style. Take the power away from the bureaucrats.
Well, just look at the Alberta Energy Regulator. And we've talked before, and you've had other guests on that it's a classic case of industry capture. And you saw the key person, the key advisor to Danielle Smith on energy policy that she has acknowledged repeatedly is Dave Yeager. And Dave Yeager used to be president of the Wild Rose Party back in the day, and he's an oil and gas guy. He was tasked with restructuring the Alberta Energy Regulator. Obviously to the benefit of industry. Then he puts himself on as chair of the board of the Alberta Energy Regulator. There's always been an issue, no matter what the name has been, around the regulatory body of Alberta Energy. It's gotten a lot worse. There's no doubt about that.
So by the time we add up all of the things that she's doing, it's not exactly ungoverning in the Trump administration style. I will grant you that. I already said that I think she's Smith 1.5, not Smith 2.0 like Trump. Nevertheless, Duane, this is a radically different approach to government. Oh, and there's one other thing I want to talk about, and this goes back to Project 2025, and that is the deep, deep connection between the UCP government, David Parker and the Take Back Alberta, and the evangelical movement in Alberta and its equivalent in the United States. That there's a direct line there. I don't think that can be denied.
Yeah, it's a bit more complicated because Dave Parker has now become full separatist, and he's really unhappy with Danielle Smith right now. There's still an issue about, is she a separatist? Is she not a separatist? Apparently in an interview yesterday, I haven't seen it, but it has been reported that she gave one of those year-end interviews to Radio Canada, and said if it came to a referendum, she would support the pro-Canada side. That's refreshing, except the fact that she's giving that interview to Radio Canada, which is a national organization, but a national French language organization. I'm not sure they pick up here in Alberta. Maybe if she'd given it on CBC or told Rick Bell or something along those lines. I think another big difference between Smith and Trump is Smith is leading this effort. So all of the things that I've talked about with Alberta Health Services, with municipalities, even with the courts, this is coming from Smith, right? Whereas it's all the president's men around Trump. Sure. And I think he's a bit unaware of that. So I don't know if that makes it better or makes it worse. And I would say the connections with Smith and the evangelical community are there, but they're with all sorts of religions. So a lot of their transgender stuff, there has been an alliance between conservative Muslims and conservative Christians on the same issue, including with David Parker and some of the people he's been some of the imams he's been working with. So I think that's a bit different as well. And you don't have just the out and out racism that you see with Trump. Does that mean that there are not racists in the Alberta Prosperity Project and within some elements of the UCP? Yes, but I am not going to call Danielle Smith a racist by far.
Yeah, and fair enough. I mean, as again, it's not perfectly analogous. There is one other area I also want to talk about,
and there's also clear connection and clear admiration that Danielle Smith has with red states in the Trump administration. And I think we've talked about that before. So there has been an inspiration that comes from them and an echoing of many of their policies, whether that's guns, LGBTQ, wokeness, book bans, climate change, you name it.
one last thing, Duane, and then I'll let you get back to grading your papers. And that
Oh
is
no, I can keep doing this. I don't want to go back.
fair enough. I've covered. We started this. I don't know if you know this, but we're in our 18th year now of Energy Media. We started in December 1st, 2008, in Calgary, and that was back in Ed Stelmach's days. And then we saw Alison Redford and Jim Prentice, and then Rachel Notley. We've seen a lot of premiers come and go. And I have to say that I have never seen a premier in Alberta or any other province that a government that conducts itself this way, where everything that comes out of that, every press release that comes across my inbox, I question. Because I think there's so much hyperbole attached to it that as soon as I see hyperbole, I go, uh-oh, what are they really doing? There's something else going on here. I need to go find out and do some reporting. I don't trust them. And I don't think I've ever seen a government like that. And that is another thing that's very similar to the Trump administration too.
Yeah, and you see that with some of the language that they use defending things. And we saw that over the surgeries and puberty blockers on the transgender issue, where she just seemed to imply and suggest that this was a large standing problem of people being sterilized, and none of that is true. It's just not true.
Yes, and trust me, on the energy file, where I know most of these issues, almost nothing is true that comes out of Danielle Smith's mouth. And I could document that for hours for you, Duane, but I'm not going to subject you to that. Well, look, I think that we are not quite in violent agreement, but I think the distance between our perspectives is not as great as I thought it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always the differences that I think are more interesting than the similarities, but there clearly is an inspiration that comes from the United States. But Canada is not the United States, and Alberta may be a pretty conservative place. It is not Texas.
You know what? I worked in Texas for 2 years in Midland, Texas, in the oil patch. Trust me, a little anecdote. The fellows I used to work with in Alberta, in Calgary, would call themselves rednecks, and I said, "Dudes, I've been to Texas. You're a pink neck at best. You are not a redneck."
There you go.
Anyway, Duane, thank you very much for this.
Okay, you're welcome.